Hello YouTube, this is Brian Tubbs coming at you with another video. Today I want to just talk a little bit about a piece I'm making. It's called Child's Play. It's blocks, 4 blocks stacked on top of each other. They stand almost about 7 feet tall. They have 3 blocks on the lower portion, which are core 10, and then as is our custom, we finish it off with a stainless steel piece on the top. So we have a block on the top that's stainless steel. This is the block here. I just tacked it up. It's all core 10, and this block will be in the second position because this is a little thinner gauge core 10. It's I think it's 16 gauge, and then so the 4 sides and the top is 16 gauge, but then on the bottom it's 10 or 11 gauge on the bottom. And the reason we do that is if you set a piece of 16 gauge or 14 gauge block on top of another block, this center is going to want to pull up, and the bottom of the other 14 gauge is want to kind of drop. So it's going to be pulling and kind of pushing at the same time. So in order to eliminate that, we will take 10 or 11 gauge and put on the bottom, and then build everything else up in 14 or 16 gauge. Because if you put the 10 gauge on the bottom, the block will sit on it, will weld the 10 or 11 gauge to this corner here, and will also weld it somewhere in the center, so you won't have that movement, because this 10 or 11 gauge metal is not going to move like a 16 or 14 gauge will. So you have solid blocks, but you still have your weight, your lighter weight going up top. So whenever you're building a sculpture, especially a tall sculpture, I mean 10 feet, 15 feet, 20 feet, whatever it is, 8 feet, 9 feet, you always want to have your heaviest weight and material on the bottom, and as you go up, your material becomes lighter and lighter. So for instance, for example, in this piece, our bottom piece is going to be I think it's 10 gauge, could be 11 gauge, but the whole block, whole bottom block is made of 10 or 11 gauge, which is a fairly about 1/8 inch thick, a little bit more than 1/8 inch thick metal. So all 4 sides, the top is all thick metal. Then the second piece, we're going to have the bottom 10 or 11 gauge, and then the rest of it will be 14 or 16 gauge, depends on what we want to use. And then the next one will be the 10 or 11 gauge on the bottom, 14, 16 going up. And then the stainless steel piece will be all 14 gauge, because we don't want much weight to that piece. Although 14 gauge stainless steel in a cube that's fairly heavy, it is not as heavy as the bottom piece, and it's not quite as heavy as the 2 center pieces. So this is the one of the blocks. Like I said, I just put it together, just tacked it up. So what I'm going to do now is kind of show you guys how we kind of put this together. So whenever you're out and you see a sculpture and you have these blocks or rectangles or triangles or whatever it is, it's not difficult to do once you know how to do it, but you just have to get everything measured out, get everything balanced out, get all your sheets of metal. You got to grind them properly. You ought to have to be basically the same. You have to know what the sculpture is going to do once it goes up. Is it going to lean one way or the other? Just those kinds of things. But putting the pieces together is not that difficult if you know how to do it. So what I have here is I have a base piece laying here, and this is a heavy gauge. I have bottom written on it, so because once we start putting this together, it is very difficult to know where your heavy piece is, because once we weld this together, it's going to be so solid that when you bang on it, it's going to be hard to tell which one is your solid piece and which sides are your more thin piece, because it's going to be like a drum. It's going to be so tight. So it's best to mark your pieces. Bottom, I have another one that's the top, and I have 4 other pieces that are the 4 sides. Now I have bottom marked on here, but I also have bottom marked underneath, because once I weld the other pieces to this, I won't be able to see that bottom written out. So if I don't have it written on the bottom also underneath, I won't know where it is. So I could have the heaviest weight on the outer wall pulling, as opposed to having it on the bottom. So that's one thing you want to do, is always mark your pieces. You can have right on the bottom, you can have right side, left side, front, back, top, whatever you need to do to remind and alert yourself what you're about to use, because you will be absolutely shocked at how many times we have been making a piece and grabbed the wrong piece, because once you're flowing and you're in it, it's hard to really think outside of what you're doing. And multiple times I have grabbed the wrong piece, tacked it up on there, and then 10-15 minutes later I realized that I grabbed the wrong piece. So now I'm trying to get my cutoff wheel in there to cut those tacks so I can take that piece off. So it's best to mark everything, just to know what pieces you're putting in the puzzle, if you will. I see a little area here. I'm going to take my grinder and just knock this little edge off, because it can give me a little grief when I start putting pieces together. It just takes a second. It's going to be a little bit noisy. It was just where the plasma cutter cut and left a little hump in that spot. And when you're doing stuff like this, you want to be as precise as possible. You don't want to leave little humps, because it could show up in your work. Alright. So I have my Weld Pro, a Mig 210 LCD fired up. And I'm going to start laying the pieces out. And what I want to do, and what you would want to do, which I'm sure a lot of you already know, if you're MIG welding pieces together, you want to leave a little gap about the thickness of your wire, somewhere in there. You don't want your pieces tightly fitted together, because when you MIG weld it, your MIG wire will not have any place to run into. So it'll really just be sitting on top of your piece. So when you grind it off, you'll start seeing these lines, the edges of the pieces you just welded together, they're gonna start coming through. Or a bunch of pinholes you're gonna start seeing. So if you're MIG welding, you leave a gap about the thickness of your wire. If you're TIG welding, you want your pieces to fit as tightly as possible, because you're really just melting them together. But with your MIG, you're filling in that gap to melt them together. Alright, so this is going to be the first thin piece. Well, it's not thin, but it's thinner than this bottom piece. I'm going to lay it on here, get it lined up as best as I can. So I can get a little bit more light. Because I must be able to see the gap in there. If I don't, because it's a little dark in here, and if I don't see the gap, and I think I have a gap, once I weld this thing together, and I go to grinding, I will notice, or remember, or know that I didn't have a gap. Let me put this light here just to kind of let me see what I'm doing. So I'm going to line it up end to end. Try and get my corners lined up as best I can. They're not perfect, they're pretty close. So then what I want to do is move this out, this piece away from this piece, just about the thickness of my wire. Maybe a little bit more, but not much. Because if you have too much of a gap, you will start blowing holes through the thinner metal as you're welding. Alright, it's going to be a little bright. I'm taking my welder tip and I'm pushing the metal away from the other metal. Just a little bit. Alright, that's the first one. Which didn't hold up really well, so I'm going to do it again. Alright, that's better. What I'm going to do now, this metal right now is really snugged up against this piece. They're touching, they're kissing. So what I gotta do now is take this metal and move it out just a little bit as I go down the line. So I must have that gap there. Again, I do not want too much of a gap, but I do want a gap. And if you're wondering why I'm not pulling my helmet down when I'm welding, I'm closing my eyes. But I also have the welder pointed away from me. But I recommend you, if you're doing this at home, wear your helmet at all times. All right, step one. Okay, so what I'm gonna do now, just so you guys can see, I normally will weld this side on next, this side, and this side. So you guys can see what I'm doing. I will kind of go in reverse. I have my sheets of Corten on the floor next to me on my table, cut out in the position I want them to be in. And that way I don't have to mark top, bottom, right, left. I know which way I'm going. So I can either use this here or I can use it here. It doesn't matter. So what I'm doing now is really trying to get the edge of this lined up with the edge of this piece on the table on both ends. I really don't care what it's doing up here, because this is kind of moving around. I'll get that later, but I want to be sure I tack it in place to the base first. While remembering, I have to have my gap there. All right. So here we go. It's bright, so. Alright, so I think I'll just dim the camera just a tad, not much. Alright, here we go. And the key to leaving that gap is there's a slight little gap in here. I just want to kind of fill that valley in with weld. So when I grind it off, the part that's in the portion that's in the weld will still be there. I won't be able to grind all of it off. The same with here, all the way around. That's why I'm being careful to leave that small gap. All right, that's side 2. Right. When I'm looking at this metal, I'm just looking at it how it came from the manufacturer. It has some copper already leaching through the metal, because evidently when it was either being shipped, it got a little water on it. And whenever this metal senses water, the copper comes out of it and wraps itself around to protect the metal. So what I'm doing is putting, it looks like rust to people, but it's not rust, it's a copper patina. So what I'll do is I'll look for those little spots and I'll put that on the inside of the piece and leave the smoother portion on the outside, the appearance side. Which really doesn't matter, because once I get finished welding it and putting it together, we're going to speed up the copper process anyway. But it's just when I'm putting it together, I just put the exposed copper portion on the inside of the piece. Not a real reason, it's just something that I do. So when you start putting pieces together, don't just put the copper on the inside because you saw Brian do it. Just know that it really doesn't matter. Grab this water. By the way, I did another show last weekend and this past weekend, and we won another award for our artwork. We were one of the featured artists. We were on the news and all that other stuff, and we won another award for our pieces.
place. I'll go ahead and tack it. All right. So the next step will be to take this piece, put it here, just reach in, tack it in. Then, once this is all tacked in down here, I'll take the top piece, lay it on. I'm going to leave all this loose. Lay the top piece on, and then start forming this to the top piece. I won't weld this together yet because the top piece could be a little bit longer than the others or a little bit shorter, or it could be on a slight angle. It could be anything. So that's why I don't start tacking this up along the sides yet until I get that top piece on. Well, all right, guys. Let me show you this before I have to move on. I don't know whether you guys can see this, but this is the copper I'm talking about. It looks like rust on here. Let me get a light. Let me brighten the camera up so you can see. Okay, so this is what I'm talking about. You can see it like streaks. It looks like rust, but that's actually the copper coming through, trying to protect this metal from the elements. And so, like I said earlier, I'll take that, put it on the inside. No rhyme or reason, I just do. I mean, this side is smoother, it has no copper breaking through, but again, it doesn't matter. Alright, guys, just wanted to kind of show you what I was doing and how we do it. And once I get the piece closer to being finished, when we start stacking on top of each other, I'll make another video so you guys can see how we do that. Alright, it's been good, and I will talk to you guys soon.